Thank you for joining today's webinar, which is hosted by the Environmental Protection Agency's Circular Economy Programme. We're really delighted to see the strong interest in this topic. We had over 100 public bodies registering for the event, and I can see people are still continuing to join. Green public procurement is a process where public authorities seek to source goods, services or works with a reduced environmental impact throughout their life cycle when compared to goods, services and works with the same primary function that would be ordinarily procured. And green public procurement can support Ireland's environmental and wider sustainable development objectives. There's been an increasing focus on the implementation of green public procurement in the public sector through, for example, the climate action plans and mandates. In April this year, the government published Buying Greener, the Green Public Procurement Strategy and Action Plan from 2024 to 2027. And this policy will play a key role in driving the implementation of green and circular procurement practices across the public sector. The focus of today's webinar is the national GPP guidance and criteria sets for priority sectors. These are a key support for public bodies in implementing green public procurement. Under Buying Greener, the EPA has lead responsibility for some actions relating to updating the guidance and criteria and developing new criteria with the support of other organisations. In July this year, updated guidance and criteria sets were published and a new criteria set for furniture. There are now 11 national criteria sets published for the priority sectors transport, ICT, food and catering, cleaning products and services, office buildings, lighting, heating equipment, energy-related products, paper and printing, textiles and furniture. I want to thank our presenters Abby Semple and Francesca Novello from Greenville Procurement Partners. Abby and Francesca are GPP experts who have worked with the EPA on developing the guidance and criteria sets. Abby will give the opening presentation, which will provide information and insights on updates to the national guidance and criteria sets, which were published this past July. And then Francesca will give an overview of the new national criteria set for furniture, again published in July. After the presentations, there'll be an opportunity to answer questions on the topic of today's webinar, and we'll answer as many as possible. But now I'd like to pass over to Abby Semple.
Greenville have been involved now in working with the EPA and indeed a number of other partners. Going back to about 2012, we first got involved in the project to produce the guidance, what was then the first edition of the guidance and Irish GPP criteria. So it's been a long journey and we're now on the third edition. And quite a lot has changed over that time in terms of what's happening in terms of legislation and policy. So you'll all be aware of that, but hopefully today we can cast a little bit of light on what's in the new guidance and criteria, as well as answering any questions you might have about those documents. This is the third edition, and it was published in July. And I think we referred to this as an interim update, as in there was a sort of full update in 2021. Whereas this was really for the purpose of incorporating new legislation and policy, as well as incorporating feedback from people who have been using the criteria and guidance and some of the emerging good practice in Ireland, which we've started to see really, I think, accelerating over the past 3 to 4 years. So there was a consultation held in the autumn of last year. Some of you might have been involved in that. So we had feedback from the public sector as well as the semi-state. Private sector bodies responded as well, and a number of third sector bodies such as NGOs and social enterprises were involved. So we collected that feedback, we analysed it, and we set about updating both the guidance and the criteria documents. Now, the criteria, for the most part, are based on the EU GPP criteria. And the EU GPP criteria are developed by an organisation known as the Joint Research Centre, which is based in Seville in Spain, and they analyse life cycle assessment studies. So they look at each product and service sector, and they look at the sort of environmental impacts for each of those products and services, and they then propose criteria to address those environmental impacts. And it's a fairly lengthy process, so it typically takes around 2 years for a new set of EU GPP criteria to be developed, and as part of that, that there's extensive consultation that takes place. And then many, not all, but many EU member states, and we include Ireland in this, take those GPP criteria and either sort of directly copy them out as national criteria, or as in Ireland's case, we do a little bit of, I suppose, adjustment. We do a consultation domestically. We try and make them perhaps a little bit more user-friendly where possible. The nature of any document which is written by committee is that it can sometimes be a little bit difficult to understand, I think. So we do our best to try and make them a little bit more intelligible and usable, and they are then published at national level. So we went through that process for 9 of the criteria sets, the existing criteria sets. There was then also a mandate to develop a new criteria set for furniture, and my colleague Francesca is going to take you through that set a little bit later on. We have not yet updated the buildings criteria, and the reason for that is that there has been a delay at EU level in terms of the updating of the buildings criteria. We are very hopeful that they will see the light of day perhaps by the end of this year, and will then be able to go through the process to update the Irish buildings GPP criteria for buildings. Just to say another word about those, they will be extended in their scope. So currently the GPP criteria for buildings only relate to office buildings, but they will be extended out to other types of buildings, so residential as well as educational buildings, for example. And those would clearly be of significance and relevance in Ireland, given the large volumes of building which are either underway or planned for the near future. I think it's worth saying, the purpose of the guidance and criteria. So I suppose some people who perhaps come to this newly, they might say, well, gosh, this is very complex, and there's a lot in them, and that's true. There's no getting around the fact that some of these are quite lengthy documents. There's a lot of detail in them. But really the purpose is to make it easier, both for you as public buyers and indeed for suppliers or bidders to incorporate green procurement into your practices. So the sort of justification or the rationale for having common criteria is that, if every public body took a slightly different approach, or indeed a very different approach when it comes to greening their procurement, that just makes it somewhat more difficult for the market to adjust and respond. So the idea is that by having some degree of commonality and common approaches, that we make it easier on both sides. So just to highlight some of the main changes to the guidance document, which you can see there. So clearly we had to address the new legislation and policy which has been adopted, and I'll look at that in a bit more detail in a moment. There's also been, I think, a stronger emphasis between 2021 and when this edition was published. I think the emphasis on circular economy has probably increased, and our understanding of what that means in practice and indeed for procurement has increased. So we'll look at an example from the textiles criteria of how circular economy considerations are now addressed as part of the GPP criteria. There are also a couple of new sections that have been added to the guidance, and these were very much based on the feedback which was received. So there's a bit more in the way of I suppose, guidance around how to use the GPP criteria, because it's not necessarily obvious. Again, if you're new to this area, do I have to use all of these criteria? To what degree can I choose between core or comprehensive? If I use one comprehensive criterion, do I have to use all the other ones? Those type of questions. So hopefully we have a little bit more in the way of guidance on how to actually use the criteria in practice. Obviously, we also addressed the new furniture criteria. And then there's been a lot in the way of publications, so statistics, links, references, which really support a GPP or of interest and relevance to those implementing it. And we've tried to include those throughout the document. There are also some new case studies included, and I'll mention at the end of my presentation that the EPA is seeking to publish some additional case studies in the near future. And there are two particular areas where we don't have common GPP criteria, but we routinely receive a lot of questions about how to implement GPP. So professional services and electricity, whilst we don't have common criteria, there are dedicated sections within the guidance that give ideas for how you can address those. Okay, so as was mentioned by Fiona, we have 11 sectors now which are covered, and you can access the updated PDF documents from the EPA link shown there. Just to note that many of you will be familiar with and will have used the OGP tool in order to access the GPP criteria. And this has the advantage that, you can search criteria, you can enter a search term, and in some ways it might be slightly more user-friendly for some purposes. At the moment, that tool is being updated, and those updates are not yet complete. So just to note that at this particular point in time, if you want to refer to the 2024 Irish GPP criteria, you should be referring to the EPA documents, and in due course, the OGP tool will be updated, and that is clearly flagged on the website when you visit it. Okay, so I mentioned that we have quite a lot of legislation now which really directly either requires us to practice green public procurement or affects it in some way. So there are some examples on this slide, and this isn't a full list because that would take too long to go through. But we are starting to see, or we have seen, EU legislation adopted over the past 2 to 3 years, really, which targets particular sectors which have been identified as being of environmental concern. So in 2023, we had 2 such regulations adopted, one relating to batteries. And this is really significant because as we move towards greater electrification in transport, as well as, we consume a lot of batteries through our use of ICT devices, for example, we have become more aware of the environmental as well as the social impacts associated with the production of batteries and the extraction and refinement of raw materials which go into batteries. So these are things like lithium, cobalt, cadmium, nickel, etc. So this regulation was adopted at EU level in 2023, and it sets specific requirements around, for example, the use of recycled materials as part of batteries, as well as what happens to them at their end of life. So those requirements have now been incorporated in the relevant criteria sets, as you can see there. Another one to mention is the Deforestation-Free Products Regulation, or EUDR. And some of you may have seen that this was actually in the news recently because the deadline for implementation for larger businesses was due to fall on the 30th of December of this year. And this is quite a wide-reaching regulation which sets requirements on businesses globally, really. So any business which wants to sell certain commodities into the European market, and these are things such as wood and paper products, but also coffee, chocolate, palm oil, soya products, cattle and leather products. So all of these commodities which have a strong link to deforestation in many parts of the world are now falling under a requirement in terms of traceability. So whoever is producing them, wherever they are in the world, has to show where they have been produced and to demonstrate that that land has not been subject to deforestation in the recent past. So it's quite an ambitious regulation, and what has happened just in the past week is that the deadline for implementation has actually been put back by the European institutions, so it will now fall at the end of next year rather than the end of this year. So that is a change which will be incorporated. We will be updating the EPA documents to make that clear. But you can see there that it affects a number of criteria. Eco-design and energy labelling, so these have been around for a while, but the requirements are always being changed, so updated and tightened in order to target better performance of products. So those changes have been reflected as well. And many of you will probably be familiar with the e-forms, which have been implemented via e-tenders. And one of the features of the e-forms is that they now include impact codes. So if you are including environmental criteria, you are asked to state which areas those are impacting. So whether it's climate change, whether it's perhaps water or water pollution, or circular economy or other considerations. So the Irish GPP criteria now include the relevant codes so that you can complete the e-forms accurately. Okay, turning to policy, and again, this is an area Fiona mentioned. We have a new national strategy adopted in April of this year. So that has been reflected in all of the criteria sets, and we'll take a look at how that has been done in a moment in terms of the incorporation of targets. We have also had several iterations of the Climate Action Plan since the last update. So those specific commitments are also reflected in the updated criteria and guidance. There are some more specific policies which have been adopted this year in relation to the built environment. So some of these relate to the Capital Works Management Framework, and some of them relate more broadly to concrete and cement. And those will in due course be reflected in the updated buildings criteria as well. Okay, I'm not going to go into detail on buying greener because I think probably at this stage most people are familiar with it. There have been, I believe, a couple of events looking at it in more detail. But just to sort of emphasise that we are now, every public body is subject to a mandate, a GPP mandate. So it's a requirement to apply green criteria currently for all contracts valued above the EU threshold, due to be extended to national value contracts at some point next year. And it takes the form of a comply or explain obligation. So you either include green criteria and say that you have done that, or you give a good reason for why you can't do that. And it is linked to a reporting requirement. Now, I can't at this point in time give you very much detail on the reporting requirement because we are eagerly awaiting a circular from the Office of Government Procurement, which I believe is due to be adopted before the end of this year, which will detail the arrangements for reporting. So I know obviously there's a lot of interest in what that will look like, but at this point in time, I can't give you the detail around that. There are currently some reporting arrangements in place for central government departments through the EPA, as well as under the public sector climate action mandate, if you're subject to that. So this will be additional reporting, which applies to a broader range of public sector bodies, but I don't know yet exactly what format that is going to take. Okay, and there are some more, I suppose, corporate or organisational requirements as well in terms of planning for GPP, as well as training. For higher spending organisations, there's also a specific requirement to look at the ISO 20400 standard. So this is the ISO standard for sustainable procurement, and to assess to what degree your procurement processes are in line with this. So really what we're seeing is a number of organisations, local authorities, state agencies, commercial semi-states, starting to either adopt a standalone GPP strategy in terms of how they do that within their organisation, or to incorporate it into their existing corporate procurement plans or standing orders, whatever document they have in place, which governs how GPP is, or how procurement is carried out within the organisation. Okay, I thought it would be useful to just look at one example of what's in the criteria. And the area of textiles is an interesting one, and it's one which has perhaps many people, I think, are surprised when we see the figures around the impact of textiles. So obviously in the public sector, we're not necessarily thinking about buying fast fashion so much, but we are in the business often of buying uniforms or workwear, protective equipment, PPE, or indeed textiles, whether that's sheets for hospital or prison beds, or other textiles which are purchased by the public sector. So textiles are extremely environmentally intensive in their production. or they can be. And you can see there it's the fourth highest impact category after food, housing and mobility. And we've also seen really rapid growth in the rate of textile consumption. Okay, so you can see there it's 5 times the rate of population growth, and we're becoming increasingly aware in the case of synthetic textiles of the risk in terms of microplastics, which end up in oceans and can have quite profound effects on aquatic life. So there's a need to address this, and within the Irish GPP criteria, you can see there the different types of product and indeed service which are included. So in some cases, some organisations purchase laundry services. So there's also criteria relating to that in terms of minimising the environmental impact of laundry services, as well as maintenance and repair or textile take-back or recycling. Okay, so this is just an example of what the criteria look like, and also how the targets from Buying Greener have been incorporated. So you can see there target 6, which relates to the recycled content of polyester fibres, has been set out, so a minimum target or minimum content of 20%. And this is then directly addressed by the updated Irish GPP criteria by TS4, so Technical Specification 4, which sort of echoes that by setting a minimum recycled content of 20%, as well as specifying the type of evidence which bidders would need to provide in order to demonstrate that they're meeting that requirement. And you can see the note there that, obviously the target is there, but there is an acknowledgement that it may not be appropriate for every application. So, for example, there may be certain types of PPE where the use of recycled polyester is not deemed appropriate for whatever reason. So there is some flexibility, and I would say some discretion on the part of the contracting authorities to identify, is this a relevant criterion, and should we apply it in this particular tender? You can see then there that there's also an award criterion. So AC1 targets performance above and beyond the minimum 20%. Okay, so you may find many operators say, well, actually, we can give you 30 or 40 or 50% recycled content without having any adverse impact on the performance of the fabric. And that's something which you may wish to target through the use of the award criterion. Okay, just a couple of other examples, and I'm not going to go through them in detail, but ICT, again, an area where our consumption of ICT products has really gone up quite sharply, and we often find that ICT products are being retired early, so we're replacing them after maybe 3 or 4 years or less in some cases. And all of this has a very heavy environmental footprint, both in terms of the raw materials going into that equipment, as well as the waste that comes out the other side. So there are a number of criteria related to ICT, and the one that's highlighted here is eco-label criteria. So there are 2 broadly accepted eco labels that have a strong presence on the market. So that's EPEAT and TCO certified. So here, technical specification 1 is targeting that minimum of 80% of ICT products to be certified under one of those standards, or indeed an equivalent standard. There's also a section of the criteria which relates to the supply of refurbished or remanufactured equipment, and probably many of you are aware of the recent framework which was set up by the OGP in relation to the supply of remanufactured ICT equipment. So that's another approach which can be followed here. Just to take a slightly different examples, and because I wanted to include one relating to services. So for cleaning services, the target set out in Buying Greener is actually about training of staff, and this I think is quite well placed in a way, because for quite some time now we've had some emphasis, for example, on the use of lower impact cleaning products, so eco-labeled products, etc. However, the staff training is really a key element. This is feedback that has come from organisations putting in place cleaning services contracts. That you can have the greenest products available, but if you haven't actually trained staff in terms of reducing the environmental impacts of the service, then you're probably not going to achieve all of your objectives. So that's the focus of the target, and there's a number of criteria set out within the Irish GPP criteria to achieve that. Okay, just a brief look at what's next before I hand over to Francesca. So as mentioned, we are awaiting a circular which should provide some further detail on the GPP reporting requirements. So I'm sure we'll all be keeping an eye out for that, and there may well be future events. I hope there will be to sort of discuss and explain those requirements once they are published by the OGP. And as mentioned, we will also probably at this stage next year be looking at updating the buildings criteria. If anyone would like to be involved, and we very much welcome involvement from across the public sector, if you could perhaps drop an email to that address shown there just to indicate that you would be potentially interested in contributing to the consultation, that would be very welcome. As mentioned, the EPA are planning to publish further good practice examples, and we have some really good ones that have come through from various organisations. So looking forward to seeing those. And the nature of the criteria and the guidance is that it does grow out of date. So there will be further updates. There will be other legislation planned or other legislation adopted. Some of the criteria, we get technological change in certain sectors. So over time, we can certainly expect to see further updates as well as potentially development of new criteria sets. So that's it for me for the moment.
So my name is Francesca Novello. I'm a consultant with Greenville Procurement Partners, and today I'll be presenting the new GPP criteria for furniture and related services. So let's start with the importance of adopting GPP criteria for furniture. So we know that EU countries represent 25% of the global furniture production, and that 10.5 million tons of furniture are consumed each year in the EU, and that a similar number is discarded by businesses and consumers every year in the EU, leading to significant environmental impacts, which are summarized here. As you can see, key environmental impacts of furniture includes the loss of biodiversity and soil erosion due to unsustainable forest management and illegal logging, or the contribution to poor indoor air quality due to VOC emissions from indoor furniture products. And coming to the approach that was taken in preparing the Irish criteria. So as anticipated by Abby, also these criteria, they follow the structure and formats of the EU criteria like the others. However, given that the latest EU GPP criteria on furniture were published in 2017, they were kind of updated from a technical point of view. So the Irish criteria, they follow a slightly different approach. They're inspired by other national criteria, such as the Dutch, the Italian, but they follow a less technical approach and are more focused on the circular economy aspects. Yes, so as mentioned by Abby and Fiona, they were published in July of this year, following consultation with public, private, and third sector bodies, and they include a series of categories. So every product that is used for storage, placement, hanging of items, or where user can rest or sit, can be either for indoor or outdoor use, and within the scope, bed mattresses are included. Then the criteria cover furniture rental services, as well as refurbishment and repair services, and end-of-life services, what we actually call end of first life, given that the criteria are inspired by the circular economy approach. Okay, so this diagram in the slide here summarizes the proposed approach that inform the criteria. So the first question that we should be really asking ourselves before going out to procure new furniture is, do we really need that? Or is it possible to repair what we already have, or even to refurbish what we have for use? In case we no longer need the furniture that we have, we may consider to donate it for somebody else's use. Or before throwing it away, we could consider recycling options, or for non-recyclable materials, we could otherwise recover energy. We also propose to lease or shared furniture instead of buying it, or even exploring if there are potential for purchasing second-hand items instead of new. So as anticipated, we cover with these criteria a series of contract types. They are classified into 3 categories, A, B, and C. A is the provision of furniture refurbishment and repair services. Then we have the provision of furniture end-of-life services. And finally, the supply of furniture products, including the related repair and refurbishment services. Within the criteria, we have selection criteria, technical specifications, award criteria, and contract clauses. And for each criterion, there is some related guidance that can be used for verifying the information submitted by tenders. Some of the criteria follow a core approach, and others a more comprehensive and ambitious approach. Then for each criterion, Abby mentioned before the new e-forms, so suggested GPP codes related to the new e-forms are suggested for the criteria. At the end, you will also find, if you consult the document, that there are sample combinations of criteria, also with some suggested weightings that can be applied for award criteria. And this is an example of one of the many criteria that are included in the GPP criteria. This is technical specification number 4, which is applicable to the supply of furniture products. So in this, according to these requirements, tenders are required to demonstrate that the design of furniture products respect the principle of sustainability, circularity, and resource efficiency, so that the response to this requirement should include information to demonstrate conformity with the requirements of the EU Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, selection of materials from renewable resources, a design approach that maximizes the service life, and consideration of the end-of-life impacts of furniture and components or materials. As I mentioned, for each criterion, we have a verification paragraph, and in this case, it is suggested to require a statement on the design approach. If third-party certification are available, a copy of this should be provided for verification purposes. And if an environmental product declaration is also available for furniture or any material or component, a link to this should be provided. In this table here, you see summarized the criteria that are applicable to the first category, so the provision of furniture refurbishments and repair services. On the column on the left, we have the core criteria, so those that are that follow a more basic approach, but still significant. And then on the right-hand side, we have the more ambitious, comprehensive approach, where you see a line which is merged. It means that that criterion can be applied. The criterion is the same for both the core and the comprehensive approach. So we have a selection criterion on environmental management system. We have technical specifications on the refurbishment requirements, on compliance with relevant legislation, requirements for upholstery materials, for the warranty, on packaging, and then we have award criteria, some that are more generic, like the one on sustainability measures in the delivery of the services. And then for a more advanced approach, we have provision of a circular economy plan. Then we cover the use of sustainable materials, extended warranty for a more comprehensive approach, sustainable packaging. We cover transports, and then we have some contract performance clauses on the reporting and packaging, on sustainability actions, on the circular economy plan, and on sustainable transport. Here we have the index for the second category, so furniture end of first life services. Again, selection criterion On environmental management system, we have 1 technical specification, 2 award criteria, and 2 contract clauses. And then this is the index for the 3rd category, the supply of furniture or the provision of furniture rental services. Again, we have various criteria that's address various issues. So we have packaging covered, the fitness for use, repair and reuse, sustainable and circular design, which is the one that I presented earlier. We have eco-labels, but we also have a selection criterion on supply chain transparency for a more comprehensive approach. Then we have, again, we cover packaging, we cover transport, eco-labels, and then reporting on packaging, sustainability measures, circular economy plan, and then transport. Okay, so in this table here, you see an example of options for combining criteria. So there are 3 options. Option 1 and 2 follow a core approach, with option number 2 being slightly more advanced. And then under option 3, we follow a more comprehensive, ambitious approach. At the bottom of the table, there is also an indication as an example of the weighting allocation for award criteria, so how this can be worked out of the total marks available. So, for example, under option 1, it is proposed to assign at least 15% for award criterion 1, which it is sustainability measures in the delivery of the services. And if we look at option 3 here, we have a more meaningful impact of sustainability in the allocation, because they could cover up to 30% of the marks, with the warranty at 5%, transport at 5%, and then the big award criterion on circular economy plan for 15 to 20% of the marks. Okay, so that was my last slide. Here you have our contact details if you want to get in touch. If not, we're happy to take any questions now.